Hello, welcome to yesterday's airlines. In this video, I thought I'd do something a bit different, and that is to look at some of the criticism that NG models have been receiving recently and try and see whether I think it has any validity or not. Because I'm seeing some pretty strong stuff being posted, and a lot of it I'm just not sure I agree with, especially when it comes to some of the odd comparisons against other brands. So, yeah, I thought I'd look through some of the arguments that I've seen other people give on forums and on the Facebook groups and on YouTube, and yeah, see whether I think they make any sense. Now, before I get started, I should just make 2 points. Firstly, all the images you're going to be seeing in this video, or most of them, are going to be pictures of NG releases from the recent times, because this is mainly a talking video, and I don't have a load of pictures to put up, and no one needs to see my face, trust me. So, enjoy the slideshow, listen to the comments. Second point is, criticism is valid, yeah? It is good to get out there, analyse and criticise and look at the models. It's the thing that Yesterday's Airline stands for, and I really want people to do it. But what I want them to do, ideally, is do it in a way that makes sense, to look at things analytically, make criticisms and suggestions based on evidence. And if the evidence doesn't stack up, then don't make them. And I'm not always sure in this case, in relation to some of this criticism of NG, that that is the case. Now, some of it is, definitely. And I have been quite strong in my criticisms of NG recently. If you've been watching my videos, you'd have seen that. But even so, I think that there's been a whole range of criticisms levelled at them recently. And quite often they overlap. Or even... even don't make sense with each other, the different arguments. So I wanted to go through, and see in detail, whether these things actually stack up. So one of the first arguments that I have seen recently is NG models are making too many models. Now, I don't even know where to start with this one, really, about why this is a problem. They're making too many models. What? No one's asking you to buy them all. And surely the more models they make, the more chance there is they're going to make something you want. I've heard some people say they're flooding the market and it's causing too much trouble for stores. As if that's your problem as a collector. I think the retailers can handle it themselves, and if they can't, they probably shouldn't be in business. But flooding the market, what does that really mean? I did a piece at the site not long ago looking through production volumes and whether NG were really flooding the market, and the answers pretty much were no, they're not. Not at all. And they're not producing drastically more than most of the other brands, or at least the larger brands anyway, the ones that actually are more than just hobbies. And if they are flooding the market, again, why is that a problem for the collectors? Because it means ultimately the models will be cheaper. But I get the feeling that NG know what they're doing. They know how to utilise the market. And if anything, it just illustrates that there's always potential in 400 scale, which has not been being used. And in fact, JC Wings have recently increased their production, increased the number of releases they're putting out a month, because they've seen that NG can produce this many models and still sell them, still do well. So if anything, NG has just shown the way. And it has been brands like Aero Classics and Gemini Jets who've been artificially keeping the market low, trying to up the value of their individual models and cut competition, rather than NG producing too many models. That's my view on it. I don't see any problem for any collectors with there being too many models to buy. That's crazy. Unless you're someone with a bit of a problem like me who's buying, well, too many models, you've probably got some quite restrictive collection criteria. The more models that are made, the more chance they're going to make the ones you want. Now, moving on, one of the things that people have said to back up they're making too many models argument is that quality's gone down and the models aren't as good as they used to be. Now, I haven't seen any real evidence to back that up. NG have never been this perfect specimen that only produces perfect models. They've always made models that have got faults on it. NG are not perfect. Now, they make better models than most, so the models tend to have less faults, so the faults are less noticeable. But they're not scoring 30 out of 30 every time I review an NG model. That's just not the case. They always are making errors, basically in livery replication and in terms of quality control. And they've been doing that for a long, long time. There have been models where they've got the fuselage colour right. I remember there was that Jordanian TriStar. They've always had an issue on their TriStars, again, for example, with getting the tyre hubs the right way around. There have always been issues. They're no worse than they've ever been. And they're certainly, if there are issues, they're not due to them making more models. They're just due to the fact that they're being made in China by people who don't earn very much. Yeah, that's it. Certainly, I see as much or more issues with other brands. And I'm not just talking about Gemini here. Literally, every few days, pretty much, someone's posting about how they received this model and the wing's off, or it's missing an aerial, or the undercarriage was broken. And it's like, come on, that's just the world we live in. Okay, these models are costing $40, $50. They're not always going to be perfect. You need to get a grip with that, okay? It's just the way it is. And I've seen no evidence to suggest that NG have changed their quality control regime or decreased the amount of glue they're putting on, unlike certain manufacturers. None at all. The models are coming just as well as they've ever done. And I get a lot of NG models and they almost never arrive broken. I mean a lot. So, yeah, it's just not true. The quality hasn't gone down. And if you're sitting there going, oh no, NG are doing things that I don't like the cockpit windows on the 747s are too big, or the window line on the A320s is too high, it's like, yeah, that's not due to them producing more models. Quite often it's actually due to NG making a specific choice and you just disagree with the decision they made. Simple as that. And to summarise this point, really, what I'm saying here is that not only is NG models quality not gone down, but it's actually as good or better than anyone else's. Arguably, it's quite a lot better than Gemini jets. I've heard of practices that I'm not going to repeat on this video, and I've seen a reasonable amount of evidence, and you see the pictures of models that come out of the factory, like the Avello 737, and you're going, how? How is that model got out of the factory? And I've never seen anything like that from NG. So realistically, is NG's quality better than Gemini's? Yeah, it is. And it's certainly as good as anyone else's. Now, the next up is probably the area which has been causing the most friction recently, and that is what NG models has been producing. And this is the area where I've been criticising them quite a lot, but I'm not necessarily criticising them for the same reasons as lots of people. So let's have a quick look at some of the reasons I've seen why people are criticising what they're releasing. Now, the first one is, and this is a universal across 400 scale, when you get down to brass tacks, basically what people are saying is, they're not making the model that I want to buy. That specific model I want to buy. And when people have got very small collection criterias, like they collect only a specific airline, or they collect a specific type of aircraft, or they collect a model they've only flown on, or they collect something that only visits a specific airport, then obviously the pool of potential models that can be made is small. And yet the number of models that could be made to fit a worldwide collectorate is huge. And you're always going to have that issue. Now, if anything, I'd say NG are doing better here than most because they're releasing more models. But NG are releasing quite an impressive diversity of releases. Certainly, they release geographically as much as anyone else, and a great deal more than brands like Gemini, who focus very strongly on the American market. Now, you may be an American collector here, but NG's been producing a lot of American material, so I don't think you've got anything to complain about whatsoever. The number of Frontiers and Southwests and JetBlues, Uniteds and Deltas that NG have been producing is pretty damn good. If anything, if you're European, you've got a lot more to complain about because NG's not been making that much in terms of European short-haul stuff there. There's been a bit of Aegean and Ryanair, but there's not been a lot of short-haul Europeans. And certainly, again, if you're in Asia, then you might complain they're not making much Singapore or Cathay, for example. But they have been making a decent amount of Chinese stuff. Not always the Chinese stuff I'd like, but still. Basically what I'm saying is you can't please everyone all the time. NG are more popular than ever. It's just the way it is, okay? They can only produce the models they can produce. And you certainly can't have it in one case say now they're making too many models and then on the other hand go, oh, but they're not making the models I want. They should be making those. It's like, grow up. That's not the way it works. Now, the second argument I see in terms of the releases, which does hold some weight again, but also not as much as it initially seems, is that NG are making a lot of repetitious models. I complain about this myself, so, I'm not immune either to being annoyed by this. And I certainly think they've been making quite a lot of repetitious models they don't need to make. However, fundamentally, when you look at the repetitious models, and by that I mean, for example, releasing 5 or 6 swoop 737s, or releasing a pair of Korean A321s in the same month, or releasing, a lot of Southwests that they've been making, or all those Avianca A320s, and I remember they made 4 Jetstar A320s as well in pretty much 4 months on the trot. That kind of thing. It can be a bit annoying, of course, unless you collect those specific airlines, in which case you're going, well, hey, love that. But the reality is, again, that this is exactly the same as everyone else does. It's just they do it slightly differently. JC Wings and Gemini both do this. They both produce exactly the same aircraft, and they'll split it across a reg. The thing is, though, that they will just release it with some distance apart between them, which is good if the distance is like 3 or 4 months or 6 months or something. It gives people maybe that extra chance. It's less good if they leave it like 2 or 3 years, which they do quite a bit. And that's why you'll see, like with Gemini, that's why you'll see when they eventually get around to using a new mould, like on the 777 or the 787, suddenly you'll see, there's a new 787, and then, the next month they'll release an old version on the old mould, and that will overlap for quite a few years because they hang on to these things and sit them in the warehouse for ages and ages and ages. And it's especially annoying when the old mould is rubbish and the new mould is so much better. Or if they've made some innovation, like adding aerials or something. I mean, even now, you still see some Gemini releases coming out which don't have aerials on some of the smaller regional aircraft, in between ones that do. And that's because the aerial-less version has been sitting in the warehouse for years. Now, it makes perfect business sense. In exactly the same way that NG making multiple regs of the same aircraft makes perfect business sense. Okay? If you produce 500 of aircraft X, and then you split that release 500 into 2 blocks of 250 with different regs on, there'll be some fleet collectors out there who'll buy both. Or you can just wait 6 months and pretend it's a new release like Gemini do. It makes sense. You've not increased your costs, and you've increased the sales potential. And anyone who doesn't see that, come on, that's just makes sense. These are businesses at the end of the day. Everyone does it. Even Phoenix, to a lesser degree. Even Aero Classics, to a lesser degree. Yeah, it's just that NG are making it more obvious by releasing the models much closer together than others. And I agree, it can be annoying, and some of the choices they've been making have been poor, because I don't think anyone needs 3 Qatar 777 MAX 8s. But, hey, maybe I just don't have the pulse of the Middle Eastern collector. So maybe I'm wrong. At the end of the day, you don't have to buy the models. But you can't sit there and go, but Gemini are doing better because NG are doing this. Because Gemini are doing it as well. If anything, they're doing it in a way which I find slightly more annoying. Okay, and now on to the third criticism of the release sets. And this is the one I think which holds the most water. It's certainly the one that annoys me. And that is NG not making use of the moulds that they have. And that, I think, has more validity than any of the other arguments. NG has nowadays got a decent sized mold catalogue of existing molds, and really they've been producing lots and lots of 737s and 787s and A350s and so on. Having said that, obviously those more modern aircraft sell better than TriStars and 747 SPs. So if you're taking it entirely on sales, then that makes a complete, it makes sense. It makes complete sense. But if you're taking it on, hey, we want to look at a diversity and we want to see more interesting models and models that aren't being made by competitors as well, so there's a broader group of models being released in the scale, then obviously it's a little annoying. It's especially annoying, obviously, also when brands like Phoenix produce dreadful 747s or Aero Classics produce dreadful TriStars, that you don't have that NG competitor, because obviously the NG version is going to be better because they got better molds than pretty much everyone else, largely across the board. So I understand it. It does annoy me though, because there's definitely a lot more potential, and there are some real slam dunk releases on older molds like Eastern TriStars, for example, which they haven't been making, even though they've been teasing you with those Buchanan hybrids. So I think this is the point that bugs me the most. But even when I see this, I can understand that you're going to sell more 77 Maxes than you are going to sell T154s. It's a sad state of affairs, but let's face it, the irony is all these kids, or mostly kids, that I see complaining about NG releases are usually American, usually just collect modern American stuff. They probably don't even know what a T154 is. And they're certainly not going to be buying any of them, and they've probably got none in their collection. So they're all sitting there going, oh, great, wasn't operated by Delta in the last 6 months, I'm not interested. So I can understand sales are going to be better for more modern types. But I personally would like to see more diversity, and obviously you'd like to think that these brands aren't in it entirely for the cash. And NG have struck me as not being in it entirely for the cash, because they've been making some pretty unusual stuff at times, though not as much as before. Now, I have criticised NG quite strongly on this point, this lack of diversity, and if you don't believe me, check out the website where I've looked at what NG has been making historically and point out this change in their production over the years, because I have criticised it strongly, and I do think it holds more water. Having said that, you can't, on the one hand, complain that NG are making rubbish models and then go out of business, and on the other hand, complain that they're not making enough obscure, unusual, weird models that probably aren't going to sell as well as newer, current, extant, contemporary aircraft. And that's unfortunate, but hey, I'm willing to accept that to a degree, and NG have at least suggested this year will be different, and there will be this let classic be classic movement towards that. Now, obviously, when I've talked about this lack of diversity, it's not just in terms of geography or aircraft type, but it's also in terms of temporal period, in terms of whether it's an aircraft from the 1980s or the 90s or 2000s or 2010s. And yeah, another area of NG's release is that I've seriously criticised recently is the increasing, or the decreasing, I guess, number of classics, or what you could consider to be classic aircraft being made. And I consider classic to be about 2000. I mean, it's different for everyone, but fundamentally, there's a lot less than there was before, and that's where this lack of potential usage of a lot of the models like TriStars, 757s, SPs, 154s, etc. comes in. But there's even classic 777s, A320s, and so on, which are not being made. So there's plenty of potential in that classic area, and you can point to lack of sales as one of the reasons, but I think it's as much to do with just lack of knowledge, really, on their part, as it is lack of sales. That is incredibly frustrating for me personally, and I know for a lot of other people it is annoying as well. You got this let classic be classic thing coming this year. I really hope to see that change. It's a little unclear whether it will that much. It depends really what that classic means from a Chinese perspective, but I think that it will, at least to a degree. And obviously there are a substantial number of new molds coming in, and that kind of brings us to the last part of the argument. Okay, so this one really grinds my gears a bit, and that is the constant criticism NG aren't releasing their new molds onto market as quickly as people want them to be. It just slightly beggars belief. Now, I can understand that there is this anticipation and real desire to get these new molds and get models made on them, especially when brands like Phoenix are producing inferior versions of 747s month after month. It does annoy me, and it worries me that they're gonna not be able to recoup the costs producing competitive versions of the same releases on their new molds. However, I think it's taking the mickey somewhat to complain about the fact NG aren't making new molds fast enough when NG have been making molds faster than any company in the history of 400 scale models, and of a high quality than any company in 400 scale has ever done. They've bought a quite substantial mold catalogue in, I think, 7 years, less than 7 years. It's incredible what they've been able to achieve. And NG have done this partly by being incredibly open and working with people like myself and, telling people what they're doing and showing them the new molds early, which puts them sometimes at a bit of a competitive disadvantage, you'd have thought too. So they're taking some hit for this. Indeed, I've been trying to work with other brands and they're really reluctant to let me publicise new molds they're producing. They'll tell me about them, but they won't let me publicise because they're concerned that someone else is going to come in and scoop that mold. So NG has been really open, and they show people their new molds and they let them discuss and give feedback. And kind of all they get for that is people then moaning about the fact that they're not producing these molds quick enough, which I just find incredible. I mean, they gave me an incredible number of molds last October to show and tell people about. And that was only, 4 or 5 months ago. And most of those molds needed rework. And in that period, since then, we've had the Christmas holidays and the Chinese New Year. So it's not surprising that it's taken a while to get these MD-80s and 767s, A330 Neos, A340s, so on, so forth, out onto market. There's a load of new molds and it's a lot to manage. So, have a bit of patience is kind of what I'm asking here. I'm super keen to see these new models as well and these new molds, but, I'm not unrealistic enough to think that they're going to be announcing and releasing, 15 new molds onto market all within 3 or 4 months of them telling you the molds exist, especially when they need rework. As we've seen, their 747s need quite a lot of rework. It wouldn't surprise me if it takes some time to get that done. And that's just the reality, I'm afraid. So it just seems incredible to moan at NG for this, especially when you consider that the competition is producing a much, much smaller number of new molds and usually of, a much lower quality. You would never see NG do what Gemini just did with that Emirates A300. Pick up a massively inferior mold from 20 years ago, slap some aerials and oversized tyres on it and bung it onto the market. That's just not what NG would do. And yet they're criticised basically for trying to get things right. And then ultimately criticised ad infinitum, when they do release the bloody things because, oh no, the cockpit's too big on that 747-8. And nobody else gets that level of scrutiny. It's just incredible. So that does annoy me, I have to say, when I see that, because it just seems really unfair. Okay, so that is a roundup, I think, of most of the criticisms that I've heard of NG models in recent times. And I hope I've not just been ranting at you throughout the video. I'll let you guys decide whether I've been saying anything of interest. But what I basically want to try and establish here really is that a lot of the issues that have been raised, or criticisms, I don't think are really particularly valid. Does NG produce too many models? No, they don't. Has the QC decreased? No, it hasn't. Do they make lots of repetitive models? Yes, but there are reasons, and it's kind of similar to the way lots of other people do as well. Are they making the model you want? Sometimes. Yeah, not always. And, you know, are they using their molds well? Yeah, maybe not that well. No, maybe that one has some validity. And in terms of classics, then definitely, if you're a classic collector, you'll be disappointed, certainly. I don't think there's any case to complain about the number of new molds they're producing. It's quite astounding. So there's definitely criticism to be had, but in some spaces I feel there's not really any valid criticism. And I could make a video like this about pretty much any of the brands in 400 scale, and it would be quite a lot more damning. In a sense, it illustrates the importance and interest in NG models that I'm making this video, and I feel the need to, because there's so much discussion. Nobody looks at other companies' releases with the sort of scrutiny that collectors are looking at NG models releases. Nobody checks over all the Phoenix models the same way, all the Gemini models, and has that level of expectation. And I guess that illustrates that NG has been really successful in what they've done, engaging with collectors, producing really high quality models and a great overall product. So maybe they're becoming victims of that success a little bit. But stick with them, is what I'm saying here. Some of these things I don't think they deserve criticism for. Some of them they probably do. But I think that they are still the best brand out there, and I could lay on loads of reasons why that is the case. You know, the molds are excellent, the overall product is excellent. Things like the CRP program, not perfect, but hey, you're getting free models. I don't see anyone else doing these kind of things. And they are still engaging with you, even though they're super busy, and the feedback they're getting isn't always particularly pleasant. So I don't really know what more people could be asking for in some of these areas. For me personally, if they could just use their mold catalogue a little bit better and mix up that retro and modern mix, then I'd be pretty damn happy with what they're doing. Hopefully that will be something which changes over the coming year. It'll be interesting to see whether it does. But even if it doesn't, they're still going to be one of the best, if not the best brands out there. And certainly, I don't think there's any competition with the boys from Vegas. Okay guys, well that's it for this video. Hope you found some of this interesting. Chuck me a comment if you do like this kind of opinion piece, or whether you'd rather I just shut up and stuck to what I usually do. But that's it from now. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time.